Hello and welcome to the Bury St Edmunds Buddhist Wednesday evening meeting. I can't see you out there, but I really appreciate you turning up. And tonight we have the fifth in our series of explorations that we've entitled How to Live Your Life, suggestions and things to think about, questions to reflect on that, well, we hope will be useful and beneficial, particularly in these quite challenging and unfamiliar times. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the quality of mindfulness and what developing and bringing more mindfulness into our lives might do, how it might benefit us and in fact might benefit the world. So this is exploring the fifth of 5 precepts or guidelines that as Buddhists we take as suggestions to develop. Okay, 5 weeks ago, I think the first of the precepts, loving kindness, which is phrased as traditionally, with deeds of loving kindness I purify my body. Okay, we explored that. Then there was generosity, then stillness, simplicity and contentment, and last week with Dridakaram we looked at truthful speech and the encouragements and ways in which we can, bring more truthfulness into our communication and into our lives. Mindfulness could be seen as really a tool. It's the quality, the ability, if you like, not to take that too literally, that we need to be able to develop and cultivate any of the other positive qualities. Okay. So, what is mindfulness? Well, to go back to the Buddha, in fact the very last words the Buddha's reported to have said to his followers, to his disciples, was, "With mindfulness, strive on." These are, I think, to be taken as words of encouragement, not an order. The Buddha was encouraging them, saying, well, practice mindfulness, keep on with mindfulness. That's all you need to do. If you do that, everything's going to be all right. Everything will follow on from that. So he didn't give a teaching on the true nature of reality. He didn't give a teaching on impermanence or conditionality. He stressed mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? Well, in this instant, mindfulness is, we can say, the same as awareness. I think the words we can take as interchangeable. And it's awareness as a practice. It's being mindful as a conscious effort, okay? A conscious effort to be more awake, I think we could say, to be more alive, to be more present in our life. Maybe an example from my own life that, I've told before, but apologies if you've heard it before, but it was an important sort of, looking back in retrospect, a little turning point in my life. So it was many years ago, before I was a Buddhist, before I'd learnt to meditate, etc. And I had a drive to work of about 25 minutes. I did that drive most mornings, of course, and back in the evenings. But there was one morning in particular when I got to work, stopped, parked up, and then sat, before I got out of the car, I sat with this sudden realization that for the last 25 minutes I have completely no idea of what happened. I was on autopilot. Presumably, the autopilot was functioning okay because I got to work okay and there was no damage as far as I could tell. But it suddenly struck me that there was 25 minutes of my life that I hadn't lived. I couldn't have even told you what my mind was doing. Presumably my mind had been off somewhere else while my body was driving the car. I couldn't even tell you that. It was a blank. And it struck me quite forcibly just in the moment that actually I wanted to be living my life. I wanted to be living as much of my life as I possibly could. I wanted to be alive and awake in my life, knowing what was happening. But then also it struck me that there were many times when that wasn't happening. Times like that last 25 minutes when I wasn't present to my own experience. So perhaps by describing a whole series of moments of unmindfulness, okay, it illustrates what mindfulness is. It's the opposite of that. It's being alive, being awake in your life, experiencing your life as it unfolds. I'll just throw in a thing. I talked about moments just then, but actually you hear the phrase people saying, well, the aim is to live in the present moment. And actually that isn't really a Buddhist concept, because in a way there are no moments. We can't separate out and pin down a moment that we can be with. It's more about being alive to the continuous unfolding of experience as it happens, okay? And being as much of us present with it as we can as it unfolds. So it's more an issue of not pinning ourselves down to one moment, but having as much of ourselves integrated and there with what we're doing and what's happening. Paying attention to things, being more mindful of things, seems to me, is paying attention to how they are in themselves, not how they relate to us. It means stepping outside of any sort of self-referencing, or at least making the attempt to do that, of just letting go of our desire for things, or our fear of things, or going beyond our lack of interest in things, and just taking some time to pay attention, really. I think mindful has also got connotations or suggests being careful as well, not in terms of cautiousness, but in taking care of things, taking them at their own value, valuing them for their own sake. It might be worth sort of imagining that whatever it is, anything that's around you, let's say the tree outside, we're lucky here, I'm at Vajrasana, we've got lots of trees. I hope you've got some aspect of nature that you can look at and contemplate, either indoors or outdoors. But seeing the tree, can you see it? Can you imagine looking at it for the first time, as if you've never seen a tree before, as if you've never seen that tree before, or maybe even for the last time? Imagine seeing it for the last time. I think that's suggested to me by um, remembering the other day of reading something from Dennis Potter, who was a TV playwright, who died a few years ago. But he wrote very movingly, if you like, a diary of during his last few days. He was dying of cancer. And in his last day, I assume knowing he was, in his last moments, really, his last hours, he wrote so movingly of the intense beauty of the blossom on a cherry tree outside his window. He wrote something like, "Never has cherry blossom seemed so intense and so beautiful and so much itself as it does right now." Well, that's the intensity that can come from really taking in the significance of things. If this was the last time you were seeing something, it would strike you. You would pay attention to it, I think, much more than when we're thinking of the next moment or the last moment or something else. So, paying attention to things, to the world around us. So, mindfulness of ourselves. Well, that can be divided up into, if you like, 3 areas. Mindfulness of our body and our physical experience, mindfulness of our emotions and emotional life, and mindfulness of thoughts. So, let's start with the body. Well, those of us that have practiced meditation know how necessary, really, and beneficial it is to bring our awareness to our physical experience. It's our physical experience of our body that's our anchor, that's our reference point to where we can bring our wandering minds back to what's happening as it's actually happening, back to our lives. There's another aspect of being mindfulness of the body, that through listening more carefully to our physical experience, it opens up sometimes to what is actually really going on with us at a level at which we're in our busy, up at the surface lives, we're not always aware. So paying attention, being aware, being mindful of our physical experience can often tell us things that we need to know. This reminds me, a bit of a digression, it reminds me of the operas of Wagner. Now in Wagner's operas, the characters on the stage acting out the plot, the story, singing away, are often not fully in touch, as we aren't, with the deeper undercurrents in what's happening, with what's going to happen, with the deeper undercurrents of their own beings, if you like. So there'll be all kinds of plotting and machinations and lying and self-deception and expectations and fears and hopes going on in the characters in the opera. But always with Wagner, the music is providing an undercurrent. It's as if the music, that is the orchestra, the orchestral part of the opera, is telling the truth, is telling a deeper truth. And it's usually a deeper truth that expresses itself, that comes into resolution by the end of the opera. So in a way, sometimes our bodies are like the orchestra in a Wagner opera. They provide us with a way of foreseeing and a way of understanding what's going on with ourselves at a deeper level, particularly if that's discomfort or pain. Often our body is telling us things that we don't always want to hear, but it would be well beneficial for us to take notice. So in our mindfulness of ourselves, our own experience, well, there's our emotional life. And it's really good to be aware of, well, if you like, the way our emotions, our emotional life is colouring our experience. Okay. When we're aware and try to track our emotional life and our emotions, well, we certainly notice that they're very strong. We can also notice that they seem to establish or want to establish their own reality. If we're angry about something, then there is something wrong out there, and the emotion is looking for the reason out there. Well, sometimes looking in the wrong place. Okay, if we track our emotions, one thing we notice is actually how effervescent they are, how they come and go, and what seems so overpoweringly real to us in 1 minute, perhaps an hour later has just evaporated to be replaced by a different set of emotions. So we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful of what's happening emotionally. We're not blocking. The aim isn't to block or to control our emotions, but just to see the way they're playing out, and to have a bit of space and perspective so that we're not swept away by them. Whether that's positive with excitement or desire, or negative, with negative emotions, but just being aware of what's happening. Okay, and just being aware of the way they are shaping our experience and taking that into account. So the third aspect of ourselves that we need to be mindful of, is our thoughts. We all know, if we try to meditate, even if we just try to sit quietly for a few moments, know what our thoughts get up to. They're all over the place. All of us have a lot of mental energy, if you like, and often that energy can seem quite, chaotic or disconnected. But it's important, actually very important in Buddhist practice, that we are able to, cultivate a more particular and clear awareness, mindfulness of our thoughts and what our thoughts are doing. The traditional word for this, if you like, ability, and that's Dharmavijaya. It's a quality of mind that is able to discriminate where our thoughts are heading. Okay, and able to discriminate whether those thoughts are taking us upwards to more positive thoughts and experience, or whether our train of thoughts is taking us down into more negative. And this is very important, because the clearer we can be about this, and the more sort of readily we can do it, we can catch a train of thought earlier. If we can catch a train of thought earlier, then we can keep ourselves out of, loads of trouble, actually. To take perhaps a fairly obvious and, perhaps common, but example, if you're able to notice that little seed of a niggle and catch it early enough in your mind and see where it's heading, recognize where it's heading. Oh, I know where that's heading. I know that little thought, and I know where it's going to lead me if I let it carry on. So it's easier to stop our trains of thought when they're just started, and maybe recognizing the cues, the little things that spark them off, than it is to try and stop them when they've got into sort of full flow and developed into a storm of, well, maybe anger. So working backwards, if you have a propensity to anger, and I'm sure none of you are, that you've got a habit of going around hitting people, it's quite hard to actually stop and transform that habit, that strong, deeply held and created pattern of habit, of behaviour at that point. If you can see the anger, the mental state of anger arising, or frustration, or what, a hatred arising, and manage to prevent it being carried out into action, that's a little bit easier. But if you can sort of recognise, be on the ball enough to recognise the first little sort of seeds of anger, the first sort of triggers, then it's much easier to do something about it. And likewise, we can recognise those triggers, those aspects of our mind, those thoughts, those reflections that we know can grow and become greater and more positive states of mind. Okay. Sometimes, states of mind like contentment, intensely positive, can be quite subtle. But if we can recognise them, and if you like, feed them and nurture them, then they grow. Whatever happens in the mind, if we give it energy, it grows. So Abhayavajra is really important. Where are our thoughts taking us? Mindfulness of things, mindfulness of ourselves in different ways, and then mindfulness of others is next on this list, if you like, this formulation. So others, other people, are out there, just as things and the world is out there. They have their own life. It's hard to believe sometimes, but they have their own reality, and it might not be the same as our own. We need to practice mindfulness of others for themselves and for their own sakes, rather than in terms of how they relate to us or how we might relate to them. What do they mean to us? What can they give us? What do they want from us? What do we want from them? What are we afraid of getting from them? There's just so many ways in which we don't quite fully come into relationship. We're not quite fully aware of the reality of other people. Okay. So communication. And the aspect of communication, particularly of listening. Karan talked about this last week. We have to pay people attention. We have to perhaps try and imagine their side of things. Imagine putting ourselves in their shoes. Maybe letting go a little bit of our own concerns and embracing theirs a little more. So freeing them up from maybe the mesh of self-regarding that we we cast around our relationships. Now we do this often, I'm sure, but we can always do more. And we need to be mindful of those times when other people have not been at the forefront of our minds. Our own concerns, our own fears and insecurities are, or our own desires and our own excitement is. So this is what we practice with the Metta Bhavana, bringing other people into our minds, paying them attention for their own sake, valuing them for their own qualities. So the fourth level of mindfulness, of awareness, is reality, being aware of reality. Well, this probably is a little harder to get a grasp of. I'm going to suggest that maybe there's two ways we can think about what's meant by this. And firstly, well, we've talked about being aware of things, the world out there, of ourselves, of others. But it's not like, well, we're aware of those things, we do all that, and then we need to be aware of reality, which is something else sort of next. And reality's over there, separate from those things. Well, it's not quite like that. In a way, we could see being aware of reality, being more mindful of reality, is what happens when we are more deeply and concentratedly aware of things, the world around us, of ourselves and of others. Okay. Reality is seeing the true nature of all those things, not seeing them in terms of their reference to us, not seeing them in terms of, how our habitual thought patterns and responses to life, to ourselves even, or to other people, but seeing the deeper nature. It might be that we begin to notice, well, the ever-changing nature of things, of the world around us, of nature. I already mentioned being aware of the effervescent and ever-changing nature of our emotions. Well, our thoughts are the same. We might begin to see the ungraspability of things. We can't own them, pin them down. The ungraspability, the lack of control that we have over others. So I said there was a second way in which we can become more mindful of reality. And that's by being more mindful of, well, the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha himself can represent, both symbolically and historically, a thread, if you like, a sort of golden thread that can link us with the possibility of living a life totally in accordance with reality and developing a consciousness, a state of consciousness that is completely at one, completely at ease and completely free in the dimensions of reality. So actually, I don't think I'm going to say myself any more than that this evening. But thank you for your company. And I will leave you with a reading. I'll leave you with the Buddha, and I'll leave you with a reading from Sangharakshita that I think expresses that last reflection much better than I could myself. So, good night. We are related to reality directly, in the sense that in the very depths of our being is something which all the time connects us with reality. A kind of golden thread, which though it may be gossamer thin, is always there. In some people that thread has become a little thicker, a little stronger. In others it is strengthened almost into a rope, while in those who are enlightened there is no need for a connecting thread at all, because there is no difference between the depth of their being and the depth of reality itself. We are all directly connected in the depth of our being with reality, although most of us don't realize it. But although we don't see that thin golden thread shining in the midst of the darkness within us, nevertheless it is there.